The city stretched across the horizon like a living machine, its towers breathing out light and mist into the violet dusk. Between the twin suns of Verelion, glass spires refracted the evening glow into rivers of color that bled down into the streets below. Airships glided between levels of suspended highways, their engines humming a low metallic hymn. Every corner flickered with holograms whispering promises, trade, pleasure, obedience. In that endless rhythm of commerce and artifice, life moved as it always did, fast enough to drown the conscience, bright enough to blind it. Eric Vance walked among it like a man out of time. The insignia of the Earth Coalition glimmered faintly on his jacket, muted against the chaos of color. His boots clicked against the transparent pavement, each step echoing faintly through the polymer layers beneath, where smaller drones scurried like insects maintaining the arteries of the city. To the locals, humans were an oddity now, flesh-born pilots in a world that had nearly outgrown the need for hands at the helm. Yet Vance carried himself with the easy composure of someone who had once steered through plasma storms and debris fields, guided by instinct rather than code. He came to the Ember Spire because it was quiet. Or at least quieter than most. The restaurant was built high above the lower smog layer, its structure fused into one of the ancient Draconoid towers, remnants from before the city had expanded outward and upward. Its walls glowed a dull orange from within, the heat-absorbing scales of a creature long extinct repurposed into aesthetic. Inside, the air shimmered faintly with warmth, carrying the scent of spice and molten metal. The clientele was mixed, humans in diplomatic attire, Draconoids wrapped in ceremonial robes, a few cyborg merchants whose voices stuttered through voice synth chips. He sat at the far corner, where he could see both the entrance and the reflection of the room in the mirrored wall behind the bar. Old habit. Pilots rarely relaxed without knowing their exits. The server approached, light-footed, graceful, and silent enough that he might have missed her if not for the faint glint of blue scales beneath the ambient glow. Her horns were short, the kind that grew back unevenly after damage. Her eyes were a muted amber, like cooled magma. She wore the restaurant's uniform, sleek, metallic threads that clung like armor pretending to be silk, and yet it could not disguise the small bruises darkening the skin beneath her jaw. When she spoke, her voice carried that melodic resonance peculiar to her kind, but something about it faltered halfway through each phrase, as if every word had to pass through a filter of caution. "Would you like the spiced nebula tea, Commander?" she asked. Her tone was rehearsed politeness. The kind drilled into service staff by employers who valued silence over sincerity. "Coffee," Eric said, his voice low. "Black." She nodded and turned away, but not before he caught the faint wince when her wrist brushed the edge of the tray. He noticed more then, the stiffness in her left shoulder, the faded scorch mark near the base of her neck, the way her steps were measured not by grace, but by calculation. As she walked past a table of Draconoid nobles, one of them murmured something under his breath, a phrase in their native tongue that made her flinch. Laughter followed, low and serpentine. Eric's fingers tapped once against the table's glass surface. A habit again, the rhythm of restraint. He had been trained to read threat signatures, to distinguish between aggression and ceremony in alien species. This was neither. It was degradation, and it was tolerated. Around him, no one lifted their gaze. Humans avoided confrontation. Draconoids considered it custom. The interspecies accords had made coexistence possible, but not equal. When she returned with his drink, the aroma hit him first, sharp, synthetic, brewed from lab-grown beans meant to mimic earth soil. She set it down gently, avoiding eye contact. Her hand trembled once. A drop of liquid struck the table, steaming faintly before evaporating. "Apologies," she whispered. "No harm done," he said, but she had already turned away. From the corner of his vision, he saw movement, the restaurant's overseer, a Draconoid male with pale silver scales that gleamed like polished armor, emerging from the kitchen. His crest was adorned with symbols of ownership, old sigils still recognized in the trade districts. He spoke sharply to the waitress in their tongue, his words clipped and rhythmic. Eric didn't understand every phrase, but he recognized the cadence of command, and the sound of reprimand. She bowed her head, murmured compliance, and disappeared behind the partition. He sipped his coffee. It was bitter, almost sterile. The kind of bitterness that left a memory of ash. Through the transparent wall, the city pulsed with neon arteries. Drones flitted between towers, scattering light in geometric patterns. Somewhere far below, a transport shuttle screamed through the lower levels, engines burning trails through the haze. Eric's reflection in the glass looked like that of a stranger, weary, sharp-eyed, unyielding. He had seen civilizations at war, planets reshaped by diplomacy masquerading as peace, species enslaved by their own laws. But the bruise on that young woman's throat struck deeper than any political treaty ever had. When she returned once more, her movements were slower, more rigid. A faint, translucent band now glimmered around her neck, a servitude collar. He had seen them used in the frontier colonies decades ago, before Earth had outlawed them. The device regulated obedience through mild neurofeedback, behavioral aid, as the manufacturers had called it. Seeing it here, gleaming softly against her scaled skin, made something cold tighten behind his ribs. She noticed his stare then, just briefly. Their eyes met, hers wide, uncertain, flickering with something that might have been warning, or plea. And then she looked away. Eric finished his drink, stood, and left without a word. Outside, the wind carried the metallic tang of ozone. He looked up at the sky, at the invisible layers of air traffic where ships moved like constellations in motion. The bruised horizon glowed faintly with the reflection of the sun setting behind the industrial districts. He didn't yet know what he would do. Only that he couldn't leave the image behind, the mark on her skin, the silence of the onlookers, the sound of her careful breathing. In every war he'd fought, there had been rules, lines drawn between necessity and cruelty. Here, those lines had blurred into the shimmer of commerce and comfort. But beneath all that light, he could still feel the shadow of something ancient stirring, the kind of injustice that demanded an answer. And for the first time since he'd laid down his wings, Eric Vance felt the old pulse return, that sharp, electric surge of purpose. Something in him whispered that the skies of Virelion were about to burn again. The next day dawned in muted colors, the twin suns veiled by low-hanging vapor from the city's reactor fields. Light filtered through the haze like diluted fire, turning the skyline into a jagged silhouette of steel and smoke. Eric Vance stood by the panoramic window of his quarters, the reflection of the city overlaying his own. His face looked carved from fatigue, the kind that came not from lack of sleep but from too many quiet realizations. He had told himself, as all soldiers did after peace, that he was done interfering. That the universe could manage its own sins. Yet the image of that draconoid girl's bruises haunted him like an unhealed scar. He turned from the window and activated the console on the wall. The holographic interface flickered to life, bathing the room in spectral blue. The coalition data stream scrolled in sharp white text, trade reports, diplomatic communiques, routine briefings about planetary stability. He opened a classified feed, keyed his access code, and let the internal reports unfold. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just following a gut instinct honed by too many campaigns. Patterns, silences, anomalies. And there it was. Under Civil Services Compliance, a record of service bonds authorized to the Ember Spire Corporation. Legal under Virelion jurisdiction. Sanctioned by the Draconoid Council. Classified as voluntary indenture. Voluntary. The word sat on the screen like a lie carved in glass. He shut down the display and left his quarters without logging the session. Outside, the corridors of the Coalition Embassy were lined with polished alloy and flickering banners of Earth's insignia. A few human diplomats passed by, their faces politely neutral. No one spoke to him. They all knew his type, the combat pilots who had seen too much, who preferred action over politics. He wasn't part of their smooth machinery of diplomacy. He was tolerated, like an antique weapon displayed for show. By midday, he was in the lower districts again. The descent from the upper towers to the ground levels was like falling through time. The air thickened with humidity and exhaust, the light dimmed into a perpetual twilight lit by glowing adverts. Street markets pulsed with alien chatter, augmented soundscapes, the occasional hum of a patrol drone. He moved through it like a shadow, guided by memory toward the Ember Spire. When he reached it, the crowd outside was denser than the night before. Draconoid guards in sleek exoskeletal armor stood at the entrance, their helmets reflecting fractured neon. Inside, the air was heavier, thick with heat and murmured tension. The same overseer stood near the bar, his silvery scales gleaming beneath the lighting. Eric caught a glimpse of Sereth behind the counter, moving with practiced grace, her collar faintly pulsing at intervals like a heartbeat imposed from without. He took a seat where he had before. The same view, the same reflective glass, but everything felt sharper now, like a weapon waiting to be drawn. She approached, carrying a tray of luminous drinks, each glass filled with vapor that coiled like ghosts. When she reached him, she hesitated for half a second, eyes flicking toward the overseer. He gave a subtle nod, not of approval, but permission. She placed the glass before Eric and whispered, barely audible, "You shouldn't be here." "I didn't come to drink," he said quietly. Her eyes darted again to the overseer, who was now occupied with a group of traders. "Then you should leave." "I saw your records," he murmured, keeping his tone neutral, almost casual. "They call it voluntary service. Is that what you call it too?" Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, she looked as if she might speak. Then her collar pulsed brighter, and she stiffened, the faintest tremor running through her body. Her voice returned, softer, emptier. "Please. Don't ask." She turned and walked away. Eric's jaw tightened. He rose slowly, his hand brushing against the edge of the table, and crossed to the counter. The overseer noticed, of course, his gaze cold, reptilian, measuring. "Commander Vance," he said smoothly, his accent layered with the heavy intonation of the old draconic dialect. "We appreciate your patronage. However, our staff are not authorized for personal engagement. You understand the boundaries of diplomacy, I trust." Eric regarded him steadily. "I understand cruelty when I see it." A faint smile curved the Draconoid's lipless mouth. "Cruelty is a human word for the systems you no longer control. Here, we call it order." There was a pause, long enough for the hum of the city outside to seep between them, the sound of hovercraft engines and distant music. Then Eric turned away without another word. But his silence was not retreat. That night, he didn't return to the embassy. Instead, he followed the trail of supply routes through the Undercity. The lower districts of Virelion were a maze of maintenance tunnels, black market exchanges, and forgotten machinery. Old war relics were traded there, human tech sold alongside alien artifacts scavenged from battlefields long past. The smell of coolant and decay hung in the air. At a data stall guarded by a half-cybernetic vendor, he found what he needed, the registry of bonded workers, encrypted but accessible to the right kind of persistence. He paid in untraceable credits, enough to make the vendor's mechanical eye flicker green with greed. The file revealed more than he expected, hundreds of names. Draconoid, human, hybrid. Each tagged under different corporate owners. The system wasn't a remnant of the past, it was the city's foundation. He leaned against the rusted wall, the dim light of the data pad illuminating his face. The hum of distant generators filled the silence. He felt the same anger that used to rise in him before a battle, controlled, precise, sharpened into purpose. There was a chain here, invisible but real, and he could feel it tightening around everything this city claimed to be. Above, through the layers of steel and cloud, the lights of the upper towers pulsed like cold stars. Somewhere up there, Sereth was still working, still bowing under the weight of obedience, her collar glowing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Eric closed the file and slipped the device into his jacket. The air shimmered as a patrol drone drifted past, scanning for energy signatures. He waited until it vanished into the fog. Then he stepped deeper into the shadows, toward the old landing platforms where his fighter lay sealed, a relic of another era, but one that still answered his command. He had once flown across battlefields for orders. This time, he would fly for something far older than duty. For the first time since the wars ended, the city's silence began to feel like the calm before ignition. Night descended upon Verelion like a curtain of liquid glass, turning the city's veins of light into molten rivers flowing between the towers. The upper districts hummed with their usual rhythm of laughter, commerce, and deceit, but below, the air trembled with the tension of something unseen. Eric Vance walked through it with the stillness of a man who had made a decision and was ready to bear its weight. He wore his flight jacket now, not the formal uniform of the Coalition, but the combat weave lined with adaptive nanofiber, the one that remembered every scar from every atmospheric entry. His insignia was gone. He no longer needed it. The Ember Spire loomed ahead, its walls glowing with that same ember hue, warm and deceptive. The plaza before it was filled with the hum of anti-grav carriages and the murmur of wealthy patrons. Above them, the transparent canopy reflected the city's underbelly, distorted, inverted, like a ghost world hovering upside down. Eric moved through the crowd unnoticed at first. He wasn't armed in any visible way, but the precision of his movements, the subtle calculation in his gaze, betrayed the pilot within him, a man accustomed to danger, trained to act before fear could intervene. Inside, the restaurant was alive with color and sound. Music thrummed low through the floor, reverberating in the bones. Drones floated between tables, serving crystalline dishes that glowed faintly in the dark. At the center, a holodisplay rippled with the image of the Draconoid Council crest, broadcasting some speech from the upper chambers. No one listened. The wealthy never listened when their world was steady. Sereth moved between tables, her steps measured, her expression a mask. The collar around her neck shimmered faintly with the same pulse he remembered. When her eyes caught sight of him, they widened, not in relief, but in fear. She shook her head once, almost imperceptibly. He ignored it. Vraxian, the overseer, noticed him almost immediately. His scales gleamed silver-white in the light, his wings folded close, a symbol of authority and vanity. "Commander Vance," he said, voice rich with mock courtesy. "Back again?" "I was under the impression humans understood boundaries once spoken." Eric's reply was quiet, but the words cut like a plasma edge. "I'm not here for conversation." Murmurs spread. The patrons turned, curious. A human confronting a Draconoid in public was spectacle enough. The tension was a living thing now, stretching across the room, tightening with every second. Vraxian rose slowly, towering over Eric, his crest flaring slightly in warning. "You've already overstepped. Leave before this becomes." He didn't finish. Eric moved. It wasn't anger that drove him but clarity, the cold, surgical kind born of years in zero-gravity combat. His hand struck the table, sending it crashing aside, and in the same motion he disarmed the Draconoid's guard, wrenching the plasma rod from his clawed grip. The weapon hummed with restrained power. A second guard lunged, his armor plates glinting. Eric sidestepped, driving his elbow into the creature's sternum, a motion so precise it looked almost rehearsed. The Draconoid fell, gasping, the air hissing from his lungs. The room erupted into chaos. Drones swarmed, scanning for threat signatures, their sensors flashing crimson. Vraxian's roar cut through the confusion. "You dare assault my property?" Eric turned the plasma rod toward him. "That's your first mistake," he said evenly. "She's not property." Sereth stood frozen by the counter, her eyes wide, the glow from her collar flickering erratically as it tried to interpret conflicting commands. Around them, customers backed away, some recording with their wrist comms. HoloLenses captured every second, transmitting it to the city's networks. Vraxian sneered, his wings flexing. "This world runs on accords, human. Not on your primitive sentimentality." "Then maybe it's time someone broke them," Eric said, and slammed the plasma rod into the floor. The energy burst fractured the tiles in a perfect circle, a shockwave rippling outward that threw chairs and glass aside but left Sereth untouched. Sparks cascaded through the air, shimmering like falling stars. Security drones dropped from the ceiling, their blue optics whirring, weapons primed. Cease hostile activity. You are in violation of Planetary Order Code Section. Eric raised his voice over the mechanical chorus, speaking not to them but to the cameras that floated above. In every world humanity touches, he said, we carry one rule: no being bleeds unseen. The words echoed through the room, captured, recorded, immortalized. The drones hesitated, recalibrating their protocols, uncertain which directive overrode the other. That hesitation was all he needed. He deactivated the plasma rod, threw it aside, and reached for Sereth. Her collar pulsed, locking her in place, but Eric's hand found the control clasp at her throat, a small, embedded chip glowing faintly beneath her scales. He pressed the override on his wrist comm, a program he had pulled from the registry earlier. The collar hissed, then went dark. She gasped, staggering forward as if freed from an invisible chain. Vraxian lunged, fury breaking through his noble facade, but Eric met him halfway, driving a sharp knee into his abdomen and sending him sprawling. The guards were too slow to react. By the time they recovered, Eric and Sereth were already moving toward the exit. The plaza outside was chaos. People had gathered, drawn by the alarms. The air shimmered with holographic feeds replaying the confrontation inside, Eric's voice, his declaration, the flash of light when the collar broke. Protest icons began to spread through the network like wildfire. Some shouted in awe, others in outrage. He turned to Sereth. Can you walk? She nodded, though her breathing was shallow. You shouldn't have done this, she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. They'll come for both of us. They already will, he replied, and led her into the storm. Above them, security patrols circled, scanning the crowd. The upper spires glowed with warning lights as the city's law enforcers mobilized. Somewhere deep in the network, the Draconoid Council would already be issuing statements, denouncing the humans' interference, calling it an act of aggression. But the footage couldn't be contained. Every second of it was being duplicated, shared, analyzed. The city's underclasses, human, Draconoid, and hybrid alike, were seeing it unfold in real time. By the time they reached the lower transport lines, Eric knew there was no turning back. The moment he acted, the city had changed. He had torn a hole in the illusion of peace, and now the light was pouring through. He guided Sereth into an unmarked shuttle, keyed a destination into the onboard AI, and sat beside her as the craft lifted from the ground, blending into the neon haze. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things neither could yet say. Outside, Virelian's skyline burned with reflected light, not from fire, but from awakening. The city of Virelian pulsed beneath them, a living organism of steel and light, as the shuttle glided along hidden conduits in the lower stratum. Eric Vance sat rigid at the controls, fingers tracing the interface with precision, the craft's adaptive engines purring beneath him. Sereth remained beside him, her amber eyes wide, reflecting both fear and disbelief. The collar lay inert on her neck, a dormant relic of enforced obedience, yet the memory of its restraint weighed on her like a shadow she could not shake. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice tentative, almost fragile. The words were measured, careful, as if each sound might trigger consequence. "Somewhere they won't find us immediately," Eric said, his tone low, not condescending but resolute. "A place humans call the Undercity, old maintenance tunnels, forgotten trade corridors, black market landing paths. It's off the grid, beyond their immediate surveillance." Seretha's tail flicked nervously against the shuttle's hull. "I've heard stories of the Undercity. It's dangerous." "Everything worth saving is," he replied, eyes fixed on the faint luminescent path ahead. The shuttle skimmed over forgotten highways, weaving between structural pillars that once supported transit systems now abandoned for more efficient anti-gravity lanes above. The city's hum became distant, muffled by layers of reinforced alloy and atmospheric filters. They landed in a cavern of concrete and shadow, the walls lined with pipes hissing steam and flickering conduits that traced impossible geometries along the ceiling. Faint neon graffiti marked the territories of scavenger clans, human and alien alike, warning outsiders of boundaries, debts, and loyalties. Eric led Sereth through the maze with practiced familiarity, nodding to figures that appeared from the shadows, traders, mechanics, and exiled draconoids, each knowing without question that he was no ordinary pilot. "Why are they letting us pass?" Sereth asked, voice barely above a whisper. Eric didn't answer immediately. He knew the code: respect was given to those who earned it through reputation, not privilege. "Because they know the alternative is worse," he said finally. "And because someone has to move first." They reached a junction where the tunnels widened into a hollow chamber, stacked with salvaged ships, engines sparking intermittently, crates of illegal goods, and dormant drones. A figure emerged from the shadows, a draconoid woman, her scales a dark iridescent purple, wings folded against her back. "He's here," she hissed in a voice that carried both reverence and warning. Eric nodded. "We need refuge and intel." The woman stepped aside, revealing a small enclave built within the cavern. Makeshift living quarters, refitted cargo modules, and command nodes linked by patched neural interfaces formed a labyrinthine network. Screens flickered with city feeds, channels for communication, maps of patrol zones, and encrypted lines of data. Eric set Sereth down gently. "You can't stay long," he said. "They'll mobilize faster than we expect." Sereth's gaze swept the enclave, taking in the clashing lights, the smell of ionized metal, and the quiet determination etched into the faces of those who had chosen exile over servitude. She drew a shaky breath. "And if they catch us?" "They won't," he said, but his voice carried no certainty. "We'll make sure they can't. But first, we have to be ready." Eric activated a holographic table, projecting a three-dimensional map of the upper city. The twin suns had set completely, leaving the neon veins of the metropolis visible like arteries of light. On the map, the ember spire glowed, surrounded by motion signatures of patrol drones, security forces, and loyalist enforcers. Eric's fingers traced a path. "We need leverage. If we want to protect you, if we want to disrupt their chain of obedience, we need a broadcast, a signal that reaches every terminal, every citizen, every outpost. Something undeniable." Sereth frowned. "A broadcast? But that will make it worse. They'll hunt you even faster." "They'll already hunt me," Eric replied evenly. "This isn't just about one caller or one injustice. It's about showing the city, everyone, that no being should bleed unseen. We don't fight for safety, we fight for truth." The enclave came alive as they worked. Humans, draconoids, hybrids, all moved with silent efficiency, repurposing old interceptors into mobile relay units, hacking patrol drones to transmit live feeds, weaving the city's communications network into a single, unstoppable channel. The hum of processors, the hiss of plasma conduits, the faint glow of repaired reactor cores filled the chamber, creating a symphony of imminent revolution. Hours passed. Eric barely slept, his mind cycling through calculations, timing, potential patrol patterns, and countermeasures. Sereth stayed close, assisting where she could, learning the interfaces with a precision that surprised even him. The fear in her eyes gradually gave way to resolve, tempered by the certainty that she would never again bow under enforced obedience. When the first relay was activated, the Undercity hummed with anticipation. The screens across the chamber flickered, showing live feeds from Virelian's upper districts. Citizens glimpsed the commotion at the Ember Spire, the confrontation, the breach. The broadcast carried Eric's voice, steady and resonant. "This is not an act of war. This is an act of conscience. All who are bound without will, all who suffer in silence, hear this: you are not invisible. You are not property. You are free." The reaction was immediate. In the streets above, comm channels flooded with messages of astonishment, defiance, and awe. Some sought the Coalition's intervention, others the Draconoid Council's. But most simply paused, uncertain how to respond to a truth that had been hidden beneath layers of law and custom. Eric watched the screens, noting each surge, each pulse of data, each ripple of awakening. Sereth stood beside him, silent, the faint glow of her collar long gone. She didn't speak, but her hand brushed his arm once, a gesture of understanding, not reliance. Outside, the city trembled. Not from destruction, but from recognition. The hidden chains were breaking, one pulse at a time. And high above, in the quiet sanctum of the Undercity, Eric knew the battle had only just begun. The Undercity had never felt more alive, yet more dangerous, than it did now. Eric and Sereth moved through the labyrinth of corridors, past dormant drones and humming fusion conduits, each step echoing against walls streaked with phosphorescent graffiti. The Enclave had become a hub of urgent activity, a place where humans, draconoids, and hybrids converged in quiet rebellion. Screens flickered with updates, data streams feeding live feeds from the city above, mapping patrol patterns and public reactions. Every relay, every broadcast, was another pulse of defiance in a city that had long learned to obey without question. Eric guided Sereth to a corner where an abandoned interceptor was being refitted. Its hull was patched with scavenged alloy, wires snaking like veins along its surface. Its engines, though dormant, had the faint hum of potential energy, waiting for the spark that would awaken them. "We're going to use this," he said, voice low. "Not just to escape, but to project the message further. Into the skies, into the networks, everywhere they can't ignore it." Seretha's tail flicked nervously as she circled the craft, inspecting the modifications. "You want to broadcast from this?" she asked. "They'll trace it immediately. They'll come after us." "They already are," he replied. "And if we wait, they'll silence every channel before anyone truly listens. This is our chance to turn fear into action." Mechanics and engineers worked around them, adjusting plasma conduits, calibrating the antenna arrays, linking neural interfaces to the city's comm satellites. The hum of power filled the chamber, vibrating through the floor, a living signal that something was about to change. Sereth assisted where she could, her scales reflecting the dim lights as she learned the controls, the mechanics of projection and signal amplification. The collar that had once bound her now rested inert at her side, a symbol of chains broken but not forgotten. Hours passed, the Enclave alive with the rhythm of preparation. Eric's mind moved constantly, paths, contingencies, timing, and countermeasures. Every potential interference had been accounted for, every patrol route mapped against the likely response of the Draconoid Council and Coalition observers. When he finally activated the neural interface linked to the interceptor, the ship hummed as if it recognized its pilot's intent. The energy thrummed beneath their feet, vibrating the air in subtle waves. Sereth leaned over the console, her fingers hovering above controls that pulsed with holographic light. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, eyes meeting his. The question was not fear alone, it was the weight of responsibility, of realizing the consequences of visibility. Eric nodded. "It's not about us anymore. It's about them, everyone who's been silenced, overlooked, or oppressed. If this works, it won't just reach the city. It will ignite something they can't contain." The interceptor lifted silently, its anti-grav systems lifting it past the maintenance corridors, through layers of reinforced shielding, and out into the open channels above the upper city. From the Undercity to the glowing streets, the transition was like passing from shadow into fire. They emerged above the neon arteries of Virelion, the upper districts glittering with life, oblivious to the pulse about to strike at their core. Eric engaged the broadcast systems. Holographic arrays unfolded around the interceptor, projecting the message in every wavelength possible. The ship became a prism of light and sound, a beacon that overrode the city's standard networks. His voice carried over every channel, clear, unyielding, resonant. "To all who are bound without consent, to all who suffer unseen, know this, there are those who will not turn away." You are not invisible. You are not property. You are free. The city responded immediately. Screens in corporate towers, personal devices, and public terminals all flickered with the same message. Drones above flickered, recalibrating as AI subroutines struggled to parse interference. Below, the underclasses, humans, draconoids, hybrids, paused, some stepping into streets to watch the spectacle, some recording, some simply listening. Reactions spread faster than the message itself: astonishment, defiance, murmurs of revolt. From the shadows of their own enclave, Eric watched the network pulse. Each data surge, each acknowledgement, was a spark in the tinderbox. "It's working," he muttered, almost to himself. Sareth stood close, her amber eyes reflecting the light of the broadcast, wide and unblinking. She was no longer the timid server he had first seen. She was something more, a participant, an ally, awakened and unbound. Suddenly, alarms from the interceptor's systems blared. The Council's fleet was mobilizing, patrol drones converging on the signal source. Tracers locked on, and the city's authorities began to respond with predictable force. "They'll be here any second," Sareth whispered, tail curling with tension. Eric's hands moved with calm precision, overriding the interceptor's cloaking protocols while maintaining the broadcast. "Let them come," he said. "They'll only see that the city is already awake." The interceptor shot through the neon arteries of the city, a streak of impossible motion, weaving between buildings and anti-grav highways. Below, citizens and drones alike followed the spectacle, unable to turn away. Protest icons, symbols of defiance, and visual records of the confrontation at the Ember Spire spread across personal and corporate channels. The city's undercurrents, the oppressed and forgotten, were awakening in real time, recognizing the signal as a call to action. By the time the Council's enforcers arrived in force, it was too late. The city had already shifted. Networks overflowed with the broadcast, images, and messages of resistance. Eric and Sareth had become catalysts, the first sparks in a fire that could no longer be contained. The interceptor banked sharply, rising above the upper districts, and Eric allowed himself a brief glance at Sareth. Her scales glinted with reflected neon, eyes wide but steady, no longer trembling. "We did it," she whispered. "For now," he said, voice hard and resolute. "The real fight begins when they realize they can't stop it." Outside, the city trembled with awareness, and the undercity hummed with the promise of uprising. High above, the twin suns had long since set, but a new light had ignited, one of defiance, of freedom, and of justice that refused to bow. The night over Verelion burned with the residual glow of neon and rebellion. The city's upper spires pulsed faintly, reflecting the chaos that had erupted hours earlier. Patrol drones streaked through the streets in organized patterns, yet their sensors found nothing of the human pilot and draconoid fugitive who had shattered the illusion of obedience. Eric Vance guided the interceptor through the upper atmosphere, its engines humming with restrained power, the ship's hull scarred from skimming past anti-grav barriers and automated security turrets. Beside him, Sareth leaned forward, her wings tucked close to her body, eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "They're mobilizing everything they've got," she said softly, voice steady now but edged with concern. "The Council won't let this go quietly." "They won't," Eric agreed, fingers dancing across the controls. "But by the time they realize what's happening, the city itself will have made its choice." Below, Verelion teemed with responses. Citizens streamed into streets, projecting holographic signs of defiance and solidarity. Draconoids once resigned to tradition stepped into the light, removing collars, defying corporate mandates, questioning loyalties. Data channels overflowed with live recordings of Eric's and Saretha's broadcasts, disseminating across sectors and networks faster than any official communications could suppress them. The ripple was exponential. A single act of conscience had become an unavoidable wave, reshaping perception in real time. Eric's voice cut through the hum of the cockpit. "You need to trust this," he said, glancing at Sareth. "Your courage started this. Your willingness to be seen, it's what's changing everything. She nodded, tail flicking once, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement. The faint bruises along her scales had faded under her natural regenerative cycles, yet the memory lingered, a scar etched into her mind, a reminder of why this fight mattered. Then we finish it, she said. The interceptor ascended into orbit, slipping past the final layers of atmospheric defense. From this vantage, the entire city was visible, the luminous veins of energy, the scattered patches of darkness where fear still held sway, and the tiny bursts of resistance lighting the streets below. Eric activated the ship's orbital transmitter, a massive array capable of overriding planetary networks. The hum of the systems was almost musical, each frequency resonating like the pulse of the city itself. Broadcast, he said, a command simple yet monumental. The ship became a beacon, projecting holographic transmissions that reached every terminal, every display, every device in Virelion and beyond. Eric's voice echoed across the metropolis, now amplified through countless channels. Freedom is not granted by laws, nor secured by fear. It is recognized, claimed, and defended. To all who have been silenced, oppressed, or restrained, rise, and be seen. You are not invisible. You are not property. You are free. Below, chaos and clarity intertwined. Corporate enforcers hesitated, uncertain whether to pursue or retreat. The Undercity erupted in coordinated movement, people streaming from shadows, activating old machinery, hacking patrol systems, creating a symphony of rebellion that no single authority could control. Draconoid workers, once resigned to their contracts, removed collars, stepped away from obedience, and joined the human-led surge. Eric's gamble had transformed into a tidal force, unstoppable because it was born from collective awareness. Sereth reached out and touched the edge of the console. It's incredible, she murmured. They're listening. They're all listening. Eric allowed himself a small, rare smile. They've always been listening. They just needed someone to show them it mattered. The Council scrambled its fleets, dispatching interceptor craft and orbital drones to cut the signal, but the transmission had already been mirrored through countless channels. The city's awakening could not be reversed. Eric calculated the optimal trajectory for their escape, the interceptor weaving through orbital defenses with precision born from decades of combat experience. Below, the city trembled not from destruction, but from realization, the old order fracturing, its authority challenged not with violence alone, but with the clarity of truth. Hours later, they broke free from Virelion's gravitational envelope. The stars stretched before them, black and infinite, the twin suns long set beyond the horizon. Sereth gazed outward, her reflection caught in the cockpit's canopy, scales glinting with starlight. Where now? She asked, voice quieter, almost contemplative. Wherever freedom is needed, Eric said. The city will recover. Some will resist, some will change. But the spark we ignited will burn long after we're gone. Sereth exhaled, a mixture of relief and wonder. I never thought I could feel like this. Seen, not used. Heard, not silenced. Eric's hand rested briefly on hers, a gesture of reassurance. You'll always be heard now. Not because of me, but because of yourself. Humanity isn't always about strength. Sometimes, it's about the courage to act when no one else will. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, a tapestry of unknown worlds and possibilities. The shuttle hummed softly as it accelerated toward the void, carrying two fugitives, two symbols of defiance, and the echoes of a city irrevocably changed. Virelion below would rebuild, its people forever altered, its systems recalibrated to account for the undeniable truth, that justice, even in a world of steel and light, was not owned by the powerful but claimed by the brave. Sereth leaned back, wings unfolding slightly in the microgravity, her eyes scanning the endless darkness. Do you think they'll remember? They will, Eric said quietly, watching the horizon. Not just the council, not just the citizens, everyone who ever doubted that freedom could matter. They'll remember that one human pilot and one draconoid woman dared to defy the order of things. And they'll carry that memory forward, because it can't be unlearned. For the first time in decades, Eric allowed himself to relax fully. The war was over, not with explosions or conquest, but with truth and courage. The scars on Seretha's scales, the bruises of injustice, the shadows of fear, all were real, all were remembered, yet none could contain what had been awakened. The stars awaited, silent, infinite, offering the promise of new worlds, new challenges, and the knowledge that when injustice appeared, there would always be someone willing to rise, to act, and to be seen. And in that vast expanse, Eric Vance and Sereth traveled together, fugitives, symbols, and witnesses to the enduring power of conscience in a galaxy built on light, shadow, and the unyielding will of those who refuse to turn away.